Clara Whitmore did not cry when they brought her to Harrington Manor. She had promised herself that much. But on the 31st morning, when the same silver tray arrived at the same empty door and the same cold silence pressed against her chest, like a stone she picked up, that tray walked the full length of the corridor and set it down in front of her husband's study. Then she knocked, not softly, not like a woman asking permission, like a woman who had finally decided she was done being invisible. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment below. Tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The morning Clara Whitmore became a wife, the sky above Harrington County was the color of old pewter, heavy low, and indifferent. The summer of 1816 had not brought warmth the way summers were supposed to. The crops in the east fields were already whispering of failure. The rivers ran slower than usual, and the great house at the top of the hill, Harrington Manor, 4 stories of dark stone and older money, sat against that sky like something carved out of grief. Clara stood at the front gate for a long moment before anyone came to receive her. She was 26 years old. She carried 1 trunk, 2 hat boxes, and a leather satchel that held her father's last letter and a small journal she had kept since she was 12. She was not beautiful in the way that drawing rooms celebrated beauty. She was sharp-faced, clear-eyed, and possessed of a stillness that made strangers uncomfortable and made enemies nervous. Her hands were steady even now, even here, even as the gate finally swung open and a man in a gray coat appeared without expression or welcome. "Miss Whitmore," he said. Not a question, not a greeting, a notation. "Mrs. Harrington," she corrected quietly. The man, she would later learn his name, was Silas Mercer, and she would learn a great deal more about him before summer's end. Looked at her the way a man looks at a piece of furniture delivered to the wrong address. He stepped aside without comment and led her up the stone path. She followed. She counted the windows on the front face of the house. 14. Every one of them dark. The marriage had been arranged in March, concluded in April, and explained to Clara in approximately 11 minutes by her father, who sat across from her in his study with the expression of a man delivering news he had already made peace with. "Elias Harrington needs a wife," her father had said. "His first wife passed 3 years ago. He has land capital and a reputation that requires stabilizing. You are practical, Clara, more practical than your sisters." He asked for someone practical. Clara had looked at her father for a long time. Did he ask for someone willing? Her father had not answered that. She had not asked again. There were things a woman of her position understood, without being told that practicality was its own kind of currency, that her father's debts had grown longer than his patience, and that a marriage to Elias Harrington, even a cold one, even a distant one, was better than the alternatives her father had not named, but that she could read plainly in the lines around his eyes. She had packed her trunk herself. She had not cried. Elias Harrington met her in the entrance hall. He was taller than she'd expected, broader through the shoulder. He wore a dark coat with no decoration, and he stood at the bottom of the staircase with his hands clasped behind him like a man waiting for a business meeting to begin. He was perhaps 35. His face was not unkind exactly. It was absent, closed the way a house is closed when no one has lived in it for years, shutters drawn fires, cold rooms locked from the inside. He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them spoke for what felt like a very long time. Then Elias Harrington said, "You'll want to see your rooms. Not welcome. Not I'm glad you've arrived. Not even you must be tired from the journey. Just you'll want to see your rooms." "I would," Clara said. He turned and walked up the stairs without waiting for her to follow. She followed anyway. Her rooms were on the east wing, 3rd floor. They were large, adequately furnished, and entirely separate from his. A maid named Dora, 16 years old, red-cheeked, and clearly terrified of doing something wrong, showed her where the linens were kept, and where the bell pull was located, and which window had a latch that stuck when it rained. "And dinner?" Clara asked. "What time is dinner served?" Dora's face did something complicated. 7 o'clock, ma'am. In the dining room. Is there another dining room I should know about? No, ma'am. Dora looked at her shoes. It's just Mr. Harrington takes his dinner in the study most evenings. The dining room is... She stopped. Go on. Large, ma'am. It seats 30. Most evenings there's only another stop. Then very quietly, there's only one setting laid. Clara was still for a moment. I see, she said. Thank you, Dora. See. That first evening, Clara Whitmore sat alone at a 30-seat mahogany table and ate her dinner with full composure. The room was enormous. The candles had been lit, she would give them that, and the food was warm, and the silver was polished to a shine that caught the light and scattered it across the ceiling. She ate slowly. She did not rush. She placed her fork and knife correctly between each bite, folded her napkin twice, and drank her water in small measured sips. She did not look at the 29 empty chairs. She was aware of them, the way you are always aware of things that are meant to make you feel small. She simply refused to let them. When she finished, she thanked the serving girl, returned to her rooms, and wrote in her journal for 45 minutes. She did not write about Elias Harrington. She did not write about the empty table or the silent house, or the weight that had settled in her chest somewhere between the front gate and the dining room door. She wrote instead about the east fields she had glimpsed from the carriage window. The crop rotation looked wrong. The soil near the creek had been overtilled. Whoever was managing the farmland was making decisions that would cost this estate dearly by autumn. She closed the journal. She slept. She was... Clara Whitmore told herself in the dark, a practical woman. And practical women did not collapse under the weight of one cold dinner in an empty room. They observed, they noted, they waited for the information they needed. She would figure out this house. And then she would figure out the man who lived in it. A week passed. She did not see Elias Harrington, except at a distance crossing the yard toward the stables, standing at the far end of a hallway before disappearing around a corner, once glimpsed through the window of his study, bent over something on his desk. He did not seek her out. He did not send word. He did not join her for dinner, not once, not even on Sunday when the local minister came to call, and had to be received by Clara, alone in a sitting room that smelled of closed curtains and old decisions. A lovely house, Reverend Gates said, accepting his tea. He was a round-faced man with kind eyes and the particular smile of someone who had learned not to ask direct questions. You're settling in well, I hope. Quite well, Clara said. Tell me, Reverend, how long has the east drainage ditch been running at the wrong angle? I noticed the flooding along the lower fence line. It looks like it's been that way for 2 seasons at least. Reverend Gates blinked. I'm not certain No matter, Clara said pleasantly, and refilled his cup. Hard. On the 8th day she found the ledgers, not because anyone showed her, not because she had been given permission, because she had spent 3 days watching Silas Mercer, the man in the gray coat, the estate manager, the man whose expression had not changed once in 8 days, and she had noticed that he always took the long way around the east corridor, and that he always locked the estate office when he left it, and that he kept the key on a chain around his neck rather than on the household ring where it belonged. A man who hides a key is hiding what the key opens. On the afternoon Silas rode out to the south fields, Clara borrowed the spare from Dora, who had not been told there was a spare, but who found it in 40 minutes when Clara asked her to check the housekeeper's cabinet and let herself into the estate office. The room smelled of ink and old paper, and something underneath both of those things, something sharp and anxious, like a wound that hadn't been properly cleaned. She did not rush. She sat down at the desk. She opened the current ledger. She read for 2 hours. By the time she stood up, her face was very still, and her hands were very steady, and she had a headache that sat directly behind her eyes, like a nail being driven slowly through wood. The numbers were wrong. Not wrong the way numbers are wrong when a man is careless or bad at his sums or confused by the complexity of managing a large estate. Wrong the way numbers are wrong when someone has decided deliberately and over a long period of time that no one is watching closely enough to notice. Rental income from the tenant farms recorded lower than the actual amounts by 15 to 20%. Supply costs for the North Fields inflated by roughly a third. 3 payments recorded to vendors whose names did not appear anywhere else in the document. Not in the correspondence file, not in the contract register, not in the delivery records. And at the bottom of the quarterly summary, a signature she had now seen enough times to recognize: Silas Mercer. Clara closed the ledger. She sat with her hands flat on the desk and thought about what she was going to do. She thought about going to Elias Harrington directly, about walking to his study, knocking on the door, and laying the ledger open in front of him. She thought about the 30 empty chairs at the dining room table. She thought about the way he had looked at her in the entrance hall, not with cruelty exactly, but with the flat absence of a man who had already decided she would not matter. She put the ledger back where she'd found it. She needed more. She needed the kind of evidence that could not be argued with, dismissed, or managed away by a man who had the master's ear and 8 years of established trust behind him. She returned the key. She went back to her rooms. She opened her journal to a fresh page. She began to write. By the end of the second week, she had established a routine. Mornings, she walked to the grounds before anyone else was fully awake. She carried her journal and a small pencil, and she wrote down everything she saw. The state of the fence lines, the condition of the tenant cottages, 2 of which had roofs that were one bad storm away from collapse. The look on the faces of the farmhands when they thought no one was watching them. The particular closed expression of men who had learned not to complain out loud. Afternoons, she sat in the east parlor, which was the room least likely to be entered by anyone in the household, and she cross-referenced what she was finding in the account books against what she was seeing with her own eyes. Evenings she ate alone at the 30-seat table, and she did not let it touch her. She was getting better at that. The not letting it touch her. It was a skill she had decided. Like any skill, it required practice. What she had not anticipated was the sound of his boots in the corridor. She heard him the first time on a Wednesday evening, about 3 weeks into her time at Harrington Manor. She was nearly finished with her dinner when she heard footsteps heavier than the servant's more deliberate pause outside the dining room doors. She did not look up from her plate. The footsteps did not enter. After perhaps a minute, she counted they moved away down the corridor. She finished her meal. She went to her rooms. She wrote. He stood outside the dining room for approximately 60 seconds tonight. Did not enter. Purpose unclear. Dora knocked on her door on a Thursday morning with pink cheeks and a look that said she was carrying something heavier than a breakfast tray. "Ma'am, Mr. Mercer says you're not to visit the estate office again." Clara looked up from her journal. "Oh. He said the accounts are his responsibility and not—" Dora's voice dropped. "Not a woman's concern." "Is that what he said?" "Yes, ma'am." Clara set down her pen. She folded her hands on the desk. She considered Silas Mercer somewhere in the house below her, satisfied with himself, certain he had solved a problem. "Dora," she said, "does Mr. Mercer know that I have a key to that office?" Dora's eyes went very wide. I don't think so, ma'am." "Good," Clara said. "Let's keep it that way." She picked up her pen again. "Thank you for telling me." Dora hesitated in the doorway. "Ma'am, aren't you frightened of him?" Clara thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "A man who relies on secrecy is afraid of the light. I'm not afraid of him." She looked up. "But I'd appreciate it if you didn't tell him that." Dora went away looking somewhat lighter than she'd arrived. Clara was not sure why honesty so often had that effect on people. Perhaps because they expected to be lied to and were surprised when they weren't. It was in the 4th week that she found the letters. She had been working through the older ledgers going back 5 years, building a timeline that could stand in a courtroom if necessary, when a bundle of papers slipped from between 2 volumes and scattered across the floor. She picked them up. They were not estate accounts. They were correspondence. Personal correspondence. written in a hand she did not recognize, addressed to Elias, and reading even after only the first 3 lines like something she had not expected to find. She did not read them all. She read enough. Enough to understand that Elias Harrington had not always been the silent, absent, closed man she had been observing from a careful distance for 28 days. There had been a before. She placed the letters back exactly as she had found them. She sat very still for a long time. She had come to this house ready for coldness and distance and the particular loneliness of a practical arrangement. She had not come prepared for the possibility that the coldness had a source, that the distance was not indifference, but something else, something older and heavier and not entirely about her. She did not know what to do with that. Not yet. On the 31st morning, the tray arrived as it always did. Same silver cover, same careful arrangement, same silence from the other side of the door. Clara sat on the edge of her bed and looked at it. She thought about 28 more mornings of the same tray. 28 more evenings at the 30-seat table. 28 more nights of writing observations in her journal and building a case against a man who stole in slow, careful increments and trusted that no one would bother to add up the total. She thought about Elias Harrington standing outside the dining room door, standing there and not coming in, night after night. And she wondered for the first time, truly wondered whether the wall between them was something he had built on purpose or something he had built because he had forgotten how to do anything else. She stood up. She picked up the tray. She carried it the full length of the corridor down the east passage, past the portraits of Harringtons going back 4 generations, and she stopped in front of the door of his study. She could hear movement inside. Quiet. The sound of paper. She knocked. Not softly. The sound inside stopped. A long pause. Then, "Come in." She opened the door. Elias Harrington was sitting at his desk with an open document in front of him. He looked up. His expression went through several things in quick succession. Surprise, something sharper beneath it, and then the familiar closing the shutters coming down, but not before she had seen all 3. She set the tray down on the small table beside the door. She looked at him directly. "Mr. Harrington," she said, "I have been eating alone for 31 days. I intend to continue doing whatever it is I'm doing in this house, and I don't require your company to do it." She paused. "But I am going to tell you something, and I would like you to hear it." He said nothing. He was watching her with the expression of a man who has not been surprised in a very long time and does not entirely know what to do with the sensation. "Your estate manager has been stealing from you," Clara said. "Systematically for at minimum 4 years, possibly longer. I have documentation, not suspicion documentation. Numbers, dates, discrepancies. I can walk you through line by line if you prefer, or I can simply leave the ledgers on your desk and let you reach your own conclusions." She held his gaze. "I don't particularly care which. What I care about is that it stops." Elias Harrington stared at her. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, somewhere in the yard, a horse moved in its stall. "You found this," he said, "in 4 weeks. "In approximately 9 days," she said. "I've spent the remaining time verifying." Something moved across his face. It was not quite readable. She filed it away. "Why are you telling me?" he asked. "Why not simply manage it yourself?" It was, Clara thought, a very interesting question, and the fact that he had asked it told her something. Because she said, "It's your estate, Mr. Harrington. It's your name on every fraudulent document. Whatever happens to this land and the people on it, the tenants, the farmhands, the girl who brings my breakfast every morning, it happens under your roof. I can fix the numbers." She let that land. "I cannot make you care about them." The room was very quiet. Elias Harrington looked down at his desk, then back up at her. There was something in his expression now that she had not seen before in 31 days of careful observation. He looked, she thought, like a man being asked a question he had spent years refusing to hear. "The ledgers," he said finally. "Bring me the ledgers." Clara looked at him for one more moment. Then she nodded. "Give me an hour," she said. She picked up the untouched breakfast tray on her way out. She was not hungry anymore. But she was, for the first time since she had walked through that front gate, something that felt dangerously close to hopeful. He gave her 1 hour. She took 53 minutes. When Clara returned to the study, she carried 3 ledgers stacked against her forearm, and her journal open to the first page of notes she had made 9 days after arriving at Harrington Manor. She did not knock this time. The door was already open. Elias was standing at the window with his back to the room, and he did not turn when she entered, but she heard the slight shift in his breathing that told her he was aware of every step she took across that floor. She set the ledgers on his desk. She placed her journal beside them. She pulled the chair on the visitor's side without waiting to be invited, and sat down. Then she waited. He turned. He came to the desk. He did not sit. He stood across from her and looked at the ledgers. The way a man looks at a letter he already knows contains bad news, not afraid of it exactly, but aware that the reading of it will change something that cannot be unchanged. "Walk me through it," he said. So she did. She opened the first ledger to the 3rd quarter of 1813, and she began to talk. She was precise. She did not editorialize. She pointed to figures, cross-referenced them against the supply records she had found in the filing cabinet behind the door, and showed him line by line, column by column, the shape of what Silas Mercer had built inside his accounts over 4 years of careful, patient theft. Elias did not interrupt. He leaned forward once to look more closely at a figure she indicated, and she could feel the heat of his attention like a change in the air pressure in the room, but he did not speak. He listened the way very few people listened completely without preparing his response while she was still talking. When she finished, she closed the journal. The clock said it was 10:30 in the morning. Elias straightened. He put both hands flat on the desk. He looked at the open ledger for a long moment. Then he said, "How much be in total across 4 years conservatively?" Clara said. "Between $8,000 and $10,000. Possibly more if there are accounts I haven't accessed yet." The number sat in the room between them like something with weight. $8,000, he repeated. Not a question. Just a man hearing the size of a wound for the first time. "At minimum," she said. He was quiet. Then, "And you found this in 9 days." "The pattern wasn't hidden well," Clara said. "It was hidden confidently. That's different. Confident hiding relies on the assumption that no one is looking. The moment someone looks..." She stopped. "The numbers speak." Elias lifted his eyes from the ledger and looked at her directly. It was the first time, the absolute first time in 31 days, that he had looked at her, and not immediately looked away. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he asked. "Because you needed more than suspicion," she said. "And because..." She held his gaze steadily. "I wasn't certain you wanted to know." That landed. She saw it land. Something shifted in his expression, brief and unguarded, and then he stepped back from the desk and turned away. "Send for Mercer," he said. "Tell him I want to see him at noon." "I'd recommend against that," Clara said. He stopped, turned back. "If Mercer knows you've found the accounts, he'll have time to prepare," she said. "He's had 4 years to build his version of events. He knows this estate better than you do right now. He's counted on that. Give him an hour to construct a story, and you'll spend a week untangling it." She paused. "Give him no warning at all, and you'll see his face when he walks through that door. That will tell you more than any ledger." A silence. "You've done this before," Elias said. It was not quite an accusation, not quite a question. "My father's estate had a similar problem," Clara said. "Different man, same logic." She did not elaborate. That was a different story, and this was not the time for it. Elias studied her for a moment. Then he nodded once, short and definitive. "This afternoon," he said. 4 o'clock. I'll send for him at 3:50. "Good," Clara said. She stood, gathered her journal, and left the ledgers on his desk where he could review them before the meeting. At the door she paused. "Mr. Harrington." He looked up. "He'll try to make this about me," she said. "He'll tell you I've overstepped, that a wife interfering in estate business is inappropriate, that I've misread the figures, that I don't understand how accounts of this scale work." She kept her voice even. He'll make it sound reasonable. He's been making unreasonable things sound reasonable for 4 years. Elias held her gaze. I understand. I hope so, Clara said. And she went. She did not go back to her rooms. She went to the east parlor, and she sat in the chair by the window, and she pressed her hands flat against her knees, and she breathed slowly until the shaking in her chest settled. She had not let him see the shaking. That was important. She was not afraid of Silas Mercer. She was afraid of the next several hours and what they would require, and whether Elias Harrington was the kind of man who, when the moment came, would hold. She did not know that yet. She knew his ledgers. She knew the shape of his loss glimpsed in letters she hadn't meant to read. She knew that he stood outside the dining room some nights and did not come in. She did not know if he was the kind of man who held. She would know by 5 o'clock. She opened her journal to a fresh page and wrote for 2 hours without stopping. Silas Mercer arrived at the study door at 4 o'clock precisely, which told her he had been waiting nearby since the message arrived at 3:50. Clara was already in the room. She had been there since 3:30, sitting in the corner chair with her ledgers in her lap, and when Mercer stepped through the door and saw her, she watched his face do something she had been waiting to see for 2 weeks. It went still. Not the stillness of composure. The stillness of a man who has just understood that the ground beneath his feet is different from what he believed it to be. He recovered in less than 2 seconds. She gave him that. He was good. Mr. Harrington, he said, addressing Elias entirely. You wanted to see me. Sit down, Mercer, Elias said. Mercer sat. He did not look at Clara again. That she noted was a mistake. Ignoring a threat does not make it smaller. It just means you're not watching it. Elias set the open ledger on the desk between them. Explain the Alderton account, he said. 3rd quarter, 1814. Mercer looked at the page. His expression did not change. The Alderton property had a poor harvest that year. The rental reduction was standard practice for. The Alderton property had its best harvest in a decade, in 1814. Clara said quietly from her corner. I spoke with Thomas Alderton's son yesterday. He remembered it specifically because his father used the surplus to reshingle the barn. He showed me the barn. Mercer turned his head and looked at her. For the first time fully, without the dismissal he'd used before. Mrs. Harrington, he said, and his voice was careful and very polite. The voice of a man placing each word like a foot on uncertain ice. Estate management is a complex matter. Figures that look irregular from the outside often have explanations that require context, she said. Yes, I've heard that argument. It's more convincing before someone has spoken to the tenants. She opened her journal. Shall I tell you what Thomas Alderton's son also told me about the 1815 grain storage fees that appear in your supply ledger because he wasn't charged those, and he has the receipts to prove it? The room was very quiet. Mercer turned back to Elias. And here, this was the moment she had warned him about, and she watched Elias watch it happen. Mercer's voice dropped into something lower, something almost sorrowful. Sir, he said, I have managed this estate for 8 years. I managed it through difficult times. I kept this house running when it might have fallen apart entirely. He paused. I don't know what Mrs. Harrington believes she has found, but I would ask you to consider the source. She has been here 31 days. She has no experience of this estate, no understanding of the relationships I've built with these tenants over nearly a decade, and with respect. His eyes moved to Clara briefly like a blade. No formal training in estate management. Clara said nothing. She looked at Elias. Elias was looking at Mercer. His face was very still. And then he said in a voice that was absolutely level, She found the Holloway payment. Mercer's stillness cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. The Holloway payment was... There is no Holloway vendor, Elias said. I checked this morning. I have every contract this estate has entered into for the past 6 years. There is no business, no individual, no property associated with the name Holloway anywhere in this county or the next. He leaned forward very slightly. So I would like you to explain to me, Mercer, not who my wife is, or how long she's been here, but who Holloway is. And I want the truth, not the version that requires context. Mercer said nothing. The clock ticked. He said nothing for long enough that his silence became its own kind of answer. And then? And Clara watched this with something close to grim admiration. Because even now, even caught, he was trying, he said, I can explain everything. I just need time to pull the relevant. No, Elias said. One word. Flat and final, as a door closing. You're dismissed, Mercer. From the estate, from the county, if you prefer to avoid what comes next. I want your key, your records, and your personal effects off this property by tomorrow morning. He stood. If I find anything missing that shouldn't be, or if any of the tenants report contact from you after today, I will take this to the county court. Do you understand me? Mercer stood. His face had gone a color that was not quite white, and not quite gray, and his hands, Clara noticed, were pressed flat against his thighs. You're making a mistake, he said. You don't know this estate half as well as you think you do. I'm beginning to, Elias said. Mercer left. The door clicked shut behind him. Clara exhaled. Elias sat back down. He put his elbows on the desk and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, and stayed that way for a long moment. She let him. She understood that kind of silence, the kind that comes when a thing you trusted turns out to have been hollow all along, and you're going back through 8 years of memory, trying to find where you should have seen it. The Holloway account, she said after a while. There are 3 payments, total just over $1,400 over 2 years. I don't know where that money went, but the pattern suggests. I don't need the pattern right now, Elias said. His voice was rough. Give me a moment. She gave him a moment. Then she said more quietly, I'm sorry. He lifted his head and looked at her. The surprise on his face was so unguarded that she almost looked away. For what? He said. For the 8 years, she said. Not your fault. But still. He looked at her for a long time. His expression was something she couldn't name, something she'd never seen on his face before, which meant very little because she'd been watching it for 31 days, and it had never shown her much of anything. Until today. Thank you, he said. It came out low and a little rough, like something he hadn't used in a while. Clara nodded. She closed the ledger. She stood. I'll have the full account ready for you by Friday, she said. Every discrepancy dated and sourced. If you want to pursue legal action, you'll have what you need. If you'd rather settle it quietly and put the money back into the farms, I can tell you exactly where to start. She was almost to the door when he spoke again. Mrs. Harrington. She stopped. Have dinner in the dining room tonight, he said. I'll be there. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the desk, not at her. His jaw was tight and his shoulders held something she recognized because she'd felt it herself on the first evening she'd sat down alone at that 30-seat table, the specific difficulty of showing up to a thing that had been empty for a long time. All right, she said. She did not make it easy for him by smiling, but she meant it. He came at 7 o'clock, 2 minutes after the food was served. He sat not at the head of the table as she'd expected, but in the chair to her left, close enough that they were no longer shouting across distance, far enough that he was not crowding her. She thought that was a choice, not an accident. She was beginning to understand that very little about Elias Harrington was accidental. They ate in silence for a while. Not the silence of the first 31 nights. That silence had weight and edges, and the particular pressure of a thing being deliberately maintained. This silence was different. It was the silence of 2 people who had just been through something together and hadn't yet decided what to say about it. It was Elias who broke it. You said your father's estate had a similar problem, he said. Clara looked up. Yes. Did he recover it? A pause. She considered how much to say. He did, she said. Partially. By the time it was found, the damage was deep enough that it changed things. She picked up her water glass. It was one of the reasons the arrangement with your family was discussed. Elias was quiet for a moment. I didn't know that. No, she said. I don't imagine you were given a great deal of detail. Were you? She almost smiled. I was given 11 minutes, she said. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not quite humor, but adjacent to it, something softer than she'd seen from him before. 11 minutes, he repeated. My father is an efficient man when he's uncomfortable, she said. The almost softness stayed on his face a moment longer than it had any right to. Then he looked back at his plate. I had less than that, he said. I was told your name, your father's name, and that you were practical. He said that, Clara said. Twice, Elias said. She did not know whether to laugh or be sad about it. She decided on neither. Well, she said, he wasn't wrong. They ate in silence again. Outside, the summer evening was going purple at the edges, the light fading slow and warm, the way it did in New England in July, even in a summer that had been colder than it had any right to be. Why did you agree to it? She asked, and then immediately wondered if she should have. But Elias didn't close down. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Because Margaret told me to. Clara waited. My sister, he said. Margaret. She said I had been absent long enough, that the estate was suffering, that I needed... He stopped, started again. She said I needed someone who wasn't afraid of me. Clara looked at him. Are people afraid of you? Apparently. He said it without satisfaction. I'm not, she said. I know, he said. I noticed. She wanted to ask about the absence, about what Margaret had meant, about what had made him absent, about the letters she had found and not read entirely, and put back exactly where they were. But she did not ask. Not tonight. Tonight had already held enough. The tenant cottages on the south edge, she said instead. 2 of them need roof work before autumn. The families in them have been managing without complaint, but one bad storm and it won't be manageable anymore. He looked at her. I noticed on my morning walks, she said. I can write up what's needed if you want to send someone to assess. You walk the grounds in the morning, he said. Every morning, she said. Since the first week. He was quiet. Then, I didn't know that. You weren't there, she said. Not accusing, just true. He held her gaze. I'll go tomorrow, he said. The south cottages. I'll go in the morning. Good, she said. She thought about saying more. She thought about telling him what she had also noticed, that the farmhands moved differently when they thought no one from the house was watching. That there was a caution in them that went beyond ordinary tenant-landlord distance, a kind of bracing, as if they were always waiting for something to go wrong. She thought about telling him that whatever Mercer had been doing with the money, the damage wasn't only in the ledgers. She decided it could wait until morning. Thank you for dinner, she said when the plates were cleared. He stood when she stood, which she hadn't expected. Old Manor surfacing. Mrs. Harrington, he said. She looked at him. Tomorrow evening, he said. I'll be here again. Clara studied him for a moment. He was not entirely comfortable saying it. She could see the effort it cost him, the particular difficulty of a man who had been closed so long that opening even slightly felt like exposure. Then I'll make sure the table is set for 2, she said. She left him standing in the dining room. She went upstairs. She sat at her desk. She opened her journal. And she wrote, He came to dinner. He will come tomorrow. The ledgers are on his desk. Mercer leaves in the morning. She paused. Then she wrote, He looked at me today. Not through me, at me. She closed the journal. She pressed her palm flat against the cover. Outside, the last of the July light gave up on the sky and went dark. Inside Harrington Manor, for the first time since she had walked through the front gate, Clara Whitmore did not feel entirely alone. She was not foolish enough to call it safety, but she recognized it for what it was, a beginning. Fragile tentative built on ledgers and confrontation, and a man learning for the first time in a long time that someone in his house was paying attention. She had a great deal more work to do. Tomorrow, the south cottages. The drainage ditch in the east field. The grain storage contracts that needed renegotiating now that Mercer was gone. The question of who would manage the accounts going forward. The question of what it meant that Elias Harrington had moved his chair 11 feet closer to hers at a 30-seat table. She was, Clara told herself firmly, a practical woman. But she sat with her hand on the journal for a long time before she went to bed. And when sleep came, it came easier than it had in 31 nights. Morning came with heat for the first time in weeks. Real summer heat, the kind that arrived with purpose and intention, and turned the fields golden by 8 o'clock, and made the air above the creek shimmer in ways that reminded Clara there were beautiful things in the world, even inside a difficult one. She was at the south fence line by 6:30. She heard him before she saw him, his boots on the dry grass, his pace deliberate, unhurried. She did not turn. He came to stand beside her. They looked at the cottage together. The roof on the eastern side had a dip where 2 support beams had gone soft. The thatch on the north corner was thin enough to see light through in spots. It was the kind of damage that a man walking past at speed would miss, and that a man who never walked the grounds would never see at all. 3 weeks, she said. Maybe 4 before the autumn rains start. I'll send for a builder today, Elias said. There's another, she said. 40 yards east. He didn't answer immediately. Then, show me. She walked. He walked beside her. It was the first time they had been side by side without a desk or a 30-foot table between them. She was aware of it. She did not make anything of it. The second cottage was worse. The family inside, she had met them the previous week. A woman named Ruth and her 2 daughters, her husband working the north fields since before sunup, had done everything they could with what they had. The interior was clean. The windows were patched with rags in the lower corners, where the frames had warped. Clara knocked. Ruth came to the door. She saw Clara, and then she saw Elias, and something crossed her face. Not fear exactly, but the kind of careful rearrangement a person does when the person with power over their life appears without warning on their doorstep. Mr. Harrington, she said, and started to step back. Don't, Elias said. He said it quietly, but it stopped her. I'm here to look at the roof, that's all. He looked up at the thatch. How long has it been like this? Ruth hesitated. 2 winters, sir. Did you report it to Mercer? Another hesitation. Longer this time. Yes, sir, she said. Last autumn. He said the funds weren't available, and it was manageable. Clara felt Elias go very still beside her. Manageable, he repeated. That's what he said, sir. Elias looked at the roof, then at the woman, then at the patched window frame. He was quiet for a long moment, and Clara watched him do something she suspected did not come easily to him, sit inside a feeling long enough to let it be real instead of analyzing it away. It will be repaired, he said finally. Before the month is out, I give you my word. Ruth looked at him. The rearrangement on her face shifted into something else, something cautious and tentative and not quite daring to be relief yet. Thank you, sir, she said. They walked back toward the house without speaking for a while. Then Elias said, How many others? I have notes on 7 properties that need varying degrees of attention, Clara said. 2 urgent, 5 manageable if addressed within the year. He was quiet. Then, when were you planning to tell me? When I had enough to show you, she said. Same as the ledgers. He glanced at her sideways. You don't trust things until you can prove them. I trust things, she said. I just don't present them until I can. They walked. My sister will want to meet you, he said abruptly. Clara looked at him. Your sister. Margaret. She's been asking about you. In her letters. He said it without looking at her, his eyes on the path ahead. She wanted to know if you were settling in. What did you tell her? A pause. I told her you were settling. That's vague. I wasn't sure what else to say. Clara thought about Margaret's name in his mouth at dinner. She told me I needed someone who wasn't afraid of me. She thought about a woman somewhere writing letters, asking if her brother's new wife was all right, and getting back answers that were careful and short, and revealed nothing, because her brother had not yet known what to reveal. You could write to her today, Clara said. Tell her I'm settling in well. Tell her about Mercer. She paused. Tell her you've been to the South Cottages. He looked at her then. She'd want to know that, he said. Not quite a question. She sounds like a woman who would want to know that, Clara said. He was quiet for another long moment. Then, she'd like you. It was a simple thing to say. But the way he said it, not easily, not lightly, with the slight difficulty of a man putting words to something he hadn't been certain about, until the moment of saying it, it landed with more weight than he probably intended. I look forward to meeting her, Clara said. They reached the house. At the door, he held it open, and she went inside, and he followed, and the house felt not different exactly, not transformed, but fractionally less sealed than it had the morning before. As if something that had been shut for a very long time had been opened just a crack, and the air moving through it was something both of them were cautious about noticing too directly. I'll look at the rest of your notes this afternoon, he said. The property list. They're on your desk, she said. He paused. You put them on my desk. I put them on your desk last night, she said, after dinner. He looked at her. There was something very startled in his expression, something that reminded her for the first time that he was not old, that under the closed face and the distance, he was a man not so very different in age from herself, and that whatever had made him this careful had done it to someone who had not always been this way. Thank you, he said again. Don't thank me, she said. Just read them. She left him in the hallway and went upstairs. She was almost to her room when she heard him below her in the entrance hall, the sound of his boots turning not toward the study, but toward the dining room. And then, a moment later, the sound of him calling for Dora. She stopped. She listened. Tell Cook, he said, and his voice carried up the stairwell clearly, that dinner will be for two from now on, every evening. She heard Dora's bright, surprised, "Yes, sir." Clara stood at the top of the stairs with her hand on the banister. She stood there for a moment. Then she went to her room and opened her journal and wrote one line. He told the cook. She underlined it. Then she went to work. The builder came on Wednesday. Clara had written the property list on a single page ordered by urgency with cost estimates beside each item, based on what she had learned from Ruth's husband Daniel about the going rate for labor and materials in the county. She had left it on Elias's desk Tuesday night, alongside her notes on the grain storage renegotiation. By Wednesday morning, the builder was at the South Cottages with 2 assistants and a cart of timber, and Daniel had come to the kitchen door to ask for Dora, and sent back a message for Mrs. Harrington that made Dora's eyes go bright when she delivered it. He said to tell you his words exactly, ma'am. He said, "Tell her we see it. Tell her we're grateful." Clara was at her desk when Dora said this. She kept her eyes on the page she was writing. "Thank him," she said, "and tell him if there's anything else that needs attention on that side of the property I want to know before the autumn." Dora hesitated. "There's something else, ma'am." Clara looked up. "There's a man at the gate," Dora said. "He won't give his name. He says he has business with Mr. Harrington. But Mr. Harrington rode out an hour ago, and the man says he'll wait." She paused. "He's been there since before the builder arrived. Silas Mercer left 2 days ago, but this man, ma'am, he looks like he knows him." Clara set down her pen. "What does he look like?" "Old," Dora said. "Well dressed. He's got a letter he keeps turning over in his hands." Clara stood. "Tell him Mr. Harrington will return by midday, and he's welcome to wait in the front parlor. Offer him tea. Don't leave him alone in any room that has papers in it." Dora moved fast. Clara moved faster down the back hallway to the estate office, which she had been using since Mercer's departure, with Elias's quiet acknowledgement and no formal word either way. She pulled the current ledger from the shelf and locked it in the bottom drawer. She took the correspondence file and put it inside her own satchel. Then she went to the front parlor. The man was already inside. He was older than she'd expected from Dora's description, perhaps 60, with a careful face and the kind of expensive coat that was meant to communicate stability rather than wealth. He stood when she entered, which was correct form. He smiled, which was practiced. "Mrs. Harrington," he said. "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced. I had hoped to catch your husband." "He'll return by noon," she said. She sat. She did not invite him to sit first. "You have business with Mr. Harrington. A matter of some sensitivity." He sat. "I'm afraid it's something I should discuss with him directly." "I manage the estate accounts," Clara said. "If this is a financial matter, you can discuss it with me." The man's smile adjusted. Not much, just enough for her to notice. "It's a legal matter," he said. "Related to the estate, but rather specific. Perhaps I should simply wait." "You're welcome to," she said. "May I ask your name?" Another small adjustment. "Aldridge," he said. "Joseph Aldridge. I'm an attorney. I have offices in Hartford." Clara looked at him steadily. "And who retained you, Mr. Aldridge?" A pause. The letter in his hands, which he had placed on the table when he sat, turned once under his fingers. "I'm not at liberty to say," he said pleasantly. "Of course," Clara said equally pleasantly. Tea. She kept him there for an hour and a half. She asked him nothing more about his business, which she knew would frustrate him more than direct questioning would. She talked about the summer, about the crop projections for the county, about a road improvement she had heard discussed at the general store. She was perfectly charming and revealed absolutely nothing, and she watched him recalibrate twice, once when she mentioned the grain contracts by name without explaining how she knew them, and once when she referred to the east drainage ditch in terms specific enough to tell him she had walked that ground herself. By the time Elias's horse came into the yard, Aldridge was holding his tea with both hands and looking at her with an expression she recognized, the expression of a man who has come expecting a wife and found something he had not budgeted for. She met Elias at the door. "There's an attorney in the parlor," she said quietly. "Joseph Aldridge, Hartford. He won't say who retained him. He arrived before you left and spent the morning at the gate. He knows Mercer. I can't prove it yet, but the timing and his evasiveness." Elias looked at her. "You've been managing him for an hour and a half." "Someone had to," she said. "Don't let him steer you to a private meeting. Whatever he's here to say, I need to hear it." He held her gaze for a moment. Something moved in his expression. Not surprise anymore, she realized. He had stopped being surprised by her somewhere between the South Cottages and this moment, and what had replaced surprise was something quieter and more difficult to name. "All right," he said. They went in together. Aldridge stood again. His eyes moved between them to Elias, then to Clara, then back recalculating. "Mr. Harrington," he said warmly, "thank you for seeing me." "My wife tells me you've been waiting since morning," Elias said. "That's a long time for a Hartford attorney to spend in someone's front parlor. Whatever you've come about must be pressing." Aldridge smiled. "It is somewhat." He glanced at Clara. "Mrs. Harrington stays," Elias said. He did not look at Clara when he said it. He said it the way he might state the weather plainly without apology or explanation. Aldridge accepted this with a small nod and opened his satchel. He produced a document several pages folded lengthwise, sealed with wax that had already been broken. "I represent a party," he said, "who has a claim against this estate, specifically against the land parcel recorded as the Holloway Grant, approximately 200 acres in the northeast corner of the Harrington holdings bordering the Andover Creek." Clara did not move. She did not look at Elias. She looked at the document. "The claim," Aldridge continued, "is that the Holloway Grant was transferred to my client through a signed agreement with Mr. Harrington himself, dated June of 1814. Elias said, "I signed no such agreement." Aldridge placed the document on the table and slid it forward. "Your signature appears on page 3, he said. Elias picked it up. Clara leaned forward, not touching it, reading alongside him. She found page 3. She found the signature. It looked like his. She had seen his signature on correspondence on household accounts. It looked very much like his. She looked at the date. June 1814. "Where was your client in June of 1814? She asked. Aldridge looked at her. "I'm not certain how that's—" "Where was Mr. Harrington in June of 1814? She said. She looked at Elias. Something had changed in his face. He was looking at the document with a stillness that went beyond composure, the kind of stillness that comes right before something breaks. "I was in Boston," he said. His voice was very quiet. "In June of 1814, I was in Boston for 3 months. He looked up. "I never set foot on this property in June of 1814. Aldridge's practiced pleasantness held. "Memory can. I buried my wife in May of 1814, Elias said. "I left for Boston the week after, and I did not return until September. There is a full record of my presence in Boston correspondence accounts, the testimony of a dozen men who met with me there through the summer." He set the document down with a quiet precision that was somehow more forceful than any gesture of anger would have been. "So, I'll ask you again, Mr. Aldridge, who retained you?" The parlor went very quiet. Aldridge looked at the document, then at Elias, then briefly at Clara. "My client," he said carefully, "prefers to remain Silas Mercer," Clara said. The name landed in the room and did not move. Aldridge's face confirmed it before any word came out of him. Just a fraction of a second, but she had been watching for it. "I cannot confirm." "You don't need to," she said. She looked at Elias. "The Holloway account. 3 payments over 2 years. He wasn't just stealing the money, he was using it to manufacture a claim. Paying someone to hold a document with a forged signature until the timing was useful." She kept her voice steady. "He knew we'd find the accounts eventually once someone looked. He needed an exit. A land claim this size, if accepted, would take years to untangle in court and would tie up the northeast parcel long enough to—" She stopped, picked up her train of thought. "Long enough for him to negotiate a settlement directly with your client. Mr. Aldridge, who is your client." Aldridge stood. He picked up his satchel with the careful movements of a man deciding how much trouble he wanted to be in. "I think," he said, "I need to consult with my client before this conversation continues." "That's wise," Clara said. "I'd also suggest consulting with him about the penalty in this state for presenting a fraudulent legal document to claim title to land." She looked at him with perfect calm. "I'm not an attorney, but I've read enough of our estate contracts to know the relevant statutes exist." Aldridge left in 11 minutes. The front door closed. Elias stood in the center of the parlor and looked at the document still lying on the table. Clara looked at it too. The signature on page 3. The date, June 1814. "He forged your signature," she said. "Yes." "He's been planning this for at least 2 years, possibly longer." "Yes." She picked up the document carefully. "This goes to your attorney today. Not tomorrow, today." She looked at him. "Do you have an attorney?" "In Hartford," he said. "Nathaniel Cross. He's handled the estate since my father's time." "Write to him now," she said. "Tell him what happened with Mercer. Send him this document. Tell him you need someone watching the county records office if Aldridge or whoever is behind him tries to file this. We need to know immediately." She paused. "Can you trust Cross?" "He's 70 years old and has known me since I was 8, Elias said. "Yes." "Good." She started for the door. "Clara," she stopped. It was the first time he had used her given name. He said it like a man who had been holding it in his mouth for a while and was uncertain of the timing. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression that was nothing like the closed, absent face she had first seen in the entrance hall 31 days ago. It was open in a way that cost him something. She could see it costing him. "If you hadn't been here," he said. "If you hadn't kept him in that parlor, gotten his name, read the document before I arrived." "But I was," she said. And I did. He held her gaze. That's not a small thing. No, she agreed. It isn't. She left him to write the letter. She went to the estate office and sat down and pressed both hands flat on the desk and breathed until her chest stopped feeling like something was wound too tight inside it. Because she had not said standing in that parlor what she had actually been thinking when Aldridge said the words Holloway Grant and 200 acres and signed agreement. She had not let any of it show on her face because she had learned young that the moment you show how much something frightens you is the moment the other person knows exactly where to press. But she was frightened, not for herself, for the shape of what Mercer had built, because a man who forges a signature and pays an attorney and manufactures a land claim does not do those things in response to being caught. He does them in preparation. He had been planning his exit before she arrived, before Elias had any reason to dismiss him, which meant she pulled out her journal, which meant Mercer had known or suspected that someone would eventually look. She wrote fast, thinking through it as she wrote. Mercer had been growing bolder in the last 2 years. The discrepancies were larger, less carefully obscured. And at the same time, he had been building the Holloway claim, spending money setting up a structure, creating a document that could, in the right circumstances, give him leverage even after discovery. He hadn't been planning to steal and run. He had been planning to steal, get caught, and negotiate. She set down the pencil. If that was the plan, then Aldridge's arrival today was not the beginning of the negotiation. It was a probe, a test of how much they knew and how ready they were, and Mercer, wherever he was waiting to hear the result. She stood up and went to find Elias. He was still in the study, the letter half written in front of him. He looked up when she came in without knocking, and she registered the fact that she was no longer knocking, and he had stopped looking surprised when she didn't. He's watching, she said. Mercer, he sent Aldridge as a test. He wants to know if we have enough to prosecute, or if there's a negotiation to be had. She sat down across from him. If he thinks we're not ready to pursue it legally, he'll come back with an offer. He'll propose settling the land claim quietly, in exchange for dropping the inquiry into the accounts. Elias put down his pen. That's blackmail with a legal frame around it, she said. Yes. And if we are ready to prosecute, then he needs to decide how much of it he wants to defend in a courtroom. She looked at him steadily. How much do we have, honestly? I know what the ledgers show. Cross needs to tell us if it's enough. I'll send the letter today, Elias said. I'll ask Cross to come in person. This isn't something to handle by post. Agreed. She paused. There's something else. He waited. The Holloway signature, she said. Whoever made it, it's good enough to pass at a distance. Close up, it's wrong, but you'd need to know what to look for. Which means the person who made it either had significant access to your actual signature, or, she stopped. Or what? Or they had help from someone still inside this house, she said. The room went very still. Elias looked at her. You think there's someone else? I think Mercer was not working alone for 8 years and kept it entirely invisible, she said. I think that's unlikely. Someone in this house knew. Maybe only peripherally. Maybe they looked away rather than assisted. But someone knew, and they are still here. And when word travels as it will that Mercer is gone, and Cross is coming, and the accounts are being audited, that person will either go quiet, or they'll panic. She met his eyes. Panicked people make mistakes. I'd like to be watching when they do. Elias was quiet for a long moment. His eyes moved over her face with that new attention. She was still learning how to hold the attention of a man who was not looking for weakness or looking away, but actually looking. You're remarkable, he said. It came out low and without ceremony, like something he hadn't entirely meant to say aloud. Clara held very still. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she hadn't been a moment before. I'm practical, she said, and kept her voice level. He almost smiled. It was the closest she had seen. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. He looked at her a moment longer. Then he picked up his pen and went back to the letter. She went back to work. Cross arrived on Friday. He was not 70. He was 64, compact and precise, with the watchful eyes of a man who had spent 4 decades reading people in courtrooms and trusted very few of them. He shook Elias's hand and then looked at Clara with an assessment that lasted approximately 4 seconds before he extended his hand to her as well. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, "your husband tells me you assembled the documentation." "I did," she said. "Good," he said simply, and followed her into the estate office. She walked him through everything. The ledgers, the vendor discrepancies, the Holloway payments, Aldridge's visit, the signature on the land claim document, the timeline she had constructed going back to 1812. She spoke clearly and without embellishment, and she answered his questions directly, and she watched him go from professionally courteous to genuinely attentive in the space of about 20 minutes. When she finished, he sat back and looked at the document spread on the desk. 8 years, he said. "At minimum," she said. "And Mercer has left the county." As of 2 days ago, Cross looked at Elias, who had been sitting in the corner chair in silence since the 3rd question. "She's right that the Holloway claim is a negotiating tool, not a genuine legal action. The signature is forged. I can see it even without a handwriting expert, though we should retain one. The document won't survive scrutiny." He paused. "But Mercer knows that. He's not trying to win a land case. He's trying to buy time and leverage." "What do we do?" Elias said. "We file first," Cross said. "Criminal complaint for theft and fraud filed in Hartford before the week is out. Once it's in the court record, any approach Mercer makes looks like what it is an attempt to obstruct." He looked at Clara. "Is there anything else I should know?" She had been thinking about it since Wednesday. She had not said it to Elias yet because she hadn't been certain. She was still not certain. But Cross was here, and certainty was a luxury she could not afford to wait for. "The forged signature," she said. "I think Dora needs to be spoken with." The room shifted. Elias straightened in his chair. "Dora, she's been in this house for 3 years," Clara said carefully. "She's not part of this. I don't believe she's part of this willingly, but she has access to every room, every document, and she was visibly nervous when I asked about the estate office key. Not guilty nervous, frightened nervous. Those are different things." She looked at Elias directly. Someone may have used her, given her an errand she didn't understand the purpose of, sent her somewhere with something she didn't know she was carrying. Elias was very still. "She's 16 years old," Clara said. "If I'm right, she's as much a victim as the tenants with the leaking roofs. But she may know something she doesn't know she knows." Cross said, "I'd like to speak with her." "Gently," Clara said. "Always," said Cross. Dora cried. Clara had expected that. She had positioned herself in the corner of the room deliberately, so that when Cross began asking his careful, measured questions, Dora's eyes would find her and not feel entirely alone. It came out in pieces. A message she had been asked to carry to a man she didn't know 8 months ago. A letter she had delivered on Mercer's instruction to an address in the town. She hadn't read it. She hadn't been asked to read it. She hadn't thought to ask why. "He told me it was estate business," she said, wiping her face with her apron. "He said Mr. Harrington knew. He said I wasn't to mention it to anyone because it was confidential." "Who was the letter addressed to?" Cross asked. I didn't look at the name, sir. I just brought it where he said." "But the address," Clara said gently. "Do you remember the street?" Dora thought. Pressed her hands together in her lap. "Miller Road," she said. "The gray house on the north end. There was a sign outside, but I don't read well, ma'am." Cross wrote it down. He looked at Clara over Dora's head. One look brief and communicative, that's enough. "Thank you, Dora," Clara said. "You've done nothing wrong. I need you to understand that. You carried a letter, that's all. Whatever was in it wasn't your responsibility." Dora looked at her, red-eyed and frightened and very young. "Will I lose my position, ma'am?" "No," Clara said without hesitation and without looking at Elias. You won't." After Dora left, Cross put his pen down and said, "Miller Road. I know that address. There's a notary there who lost his license in 1811. Works privately now. Does document work for people who don't want a record kept." He looked at Elias. That's where the signature was made. Elias stood. He had been very controlled for 3 hours, and the control was still there, but underneath it, something was pressing against it. She could feel it from across the room. "File the complaint," he said to Cross. "Today if possible, tomorrow at the latest." "Today?" Cross said. He began assembling papers. "I'll need you to sign the sworn statement. And Mrs. Harrington." He looked at her. "I'd like your statement as well, as the party who discovered the accounts." "Of course," she said. Cross went to prepare the documents in the front parlor, leaving them alone in the estate office. Elias stood with his back to the room for a long moment. Then he said without turning, "You told Dora she wouldn't lose her position." "Yes," Clara said. "Without asking me?" "Yes." A pause. She waited to see what he would do with it. He turned. He was not angry. He was looking at her with that expression again, the open one, the one that cost him something. "I would have said the same thing," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I said it without asking." He held her gaze. Something moved in his face. Something that had been working its way to the surface since Wednesday, maybe longer, and had not quite gotten there yet. He opened his mouth, and then Cross knocked on the door, and the moment closed, and they both moved into the practical business of signed statements and sworn testimony, and the clean necessary machinery of justice being set in motion. But that evening at dinner, their place settings 2 chairs apart. Now, not 11 feet, not 30. Elias reached across the table and picked up her water glass, which was empty, and filled it without being asked, and set it back in front of her without comment. Clara looked at it. Then she looked at him. He was looking at his plate. She picked up the glass. She drank. Outside, the summer evening was doing what it had been doing all week, going gold and then purple and then dark in that slow, inexorable way that made it feel like time was both passing and standing still. Inside Harrington Manor was quieter than it had ever been since she arrived. But the quiet was different now. It was not the quiet of a house holding its breath. It was the quiet of a house that had stopped bracing. And in the morning, Clara knew there would be more work. Cross would file the complaint. The county record office would need watching. Mercer was still out there somewhere waiting to hear how his gamble had landed. The northeast parcel would need surveying. The tenant accounts needed to be recalculated and the underpaid rental income restored. There was a great deal still to do. But sitting across from Elias Harrington in the long gold evening with her water glass full and the table set for 2, Clara Whitmore felt something she had not felt since she walked through the front gate of this house. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She did not say it. She was a practical woman, but she felt it. And some things did not need to be said to be true. Cross filed the complaint on Saturday morning. By Saturday afternoon, word had traveled the way word always travels in a county where everyone knows everyone, and nothing stays quiet longer than it takes a horse to cover 3 miles. Clara heard it from Ruth, who heard it from her husband Daniel, who heard it at the feed store in town, from a man who had seen Cross ride into the courthouse with a sealed document and a face that meant business. "They're saying Mercer stole from the estate," Ruth told Clara at the south cottage where the new roof timber was going up. "They're saying it's been going on for years." "That's accurate," Clara said. Ruth looked at her for a long moment. "They're also saying it was you who found it." "That's accurate too," Clara said. Ruth was quiet. Then she said something that Clara carried with her for the rest of the day. "We knew something was wrong. The tenants. We knew for a long time. We just didn't think anyone in that house was going to look." Clara nodded. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that someone in that house had not been looking, had not been present enough to look, and that the cost of that absence had been paid quietly and without complaint by every family on this land for years. She did not say it because it was not Ruth's burden to carry, and because Elias already knew it, and because the ledgers had said it more clearly than any words she could offer. "We're looking now," she said instead. Ruth nodded. That was enough. The letter from Margaret arrived on Monday. Clara was in the estate office when Dora brought it up, not addressed to Elias, which would have been expected, but addressed to Mrs. Elias Harrington in a hand that was quick and decisive and entirely unintimidated by the blank space of an envelope. She opened it. It was 4 pages. Dense, warm, and written with the kind of directness that told Clara immediately that Margaret Harrington had spent a lifetime saying exactly what she meant, and had never particularly apologized for it. "Dear Mrs. Harrington," it began. "My brother tells me you are settling in well, which from Elias means either that you have survived the first month without incident, or that something significant has happened, and he is underreporting it. Given that he has also mentioned in the same letter the dismissal of Mercer, and the visit of an attorney, and the filing of a legal complaint, I suspect the latter. I am writing to you directly because I find that the most efficient way to learn anything useful is to ask the person who actually did the work." Clara read the whole letter without stopping. Margaret was 32, unmarried by choice, and without apparent regret living in Providence, where she managed a small charitable organization that provided literacy education to working women. She was sharp. She was warm beneath the sharpness. And she had, in 4 dense pages, asked Clara more real questions about her experience at Harrington Manor than anyone else had managed in 40 days. She asked about the tenants, about the accounts, about the state of the northeast parcel. She asked carefully, but without apology, how Clara found her brother. And at the bottom of the last page she wrote, "He has been away from himself for a long time. I don't mean geographically. I think you know what I mean. I hope you will be patient with him. Not because he deserves infinite patience, no one does, but because I believe he is trying to find his way back, and that is a thing worth supporting when you see it happening." Clara set the letter down. She sat with it for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and began to write back. She did not tell Elias about the letter immediately. Not because she was hiding it, she intended to tell him, but because Monday brought something more pressing than correspondence. Cross sent a messenger at noon. The message was short. "Mercer has been located. He is in Springfield. He has retained counsel. His attorney has made contact requesting a meeting to discuss terms. I recommend against any meeting until we speak. Come to Hartford at your earliest convenience, or I will come to you. N. Cross." Clara read it in the estate office and then walked it directly to Elias in the study. He read it standing. His jaw tightened on the second line and did not loosen. "Terms," he said. "He wants to negotiate," she said. "He's afraid of the courtroom." "That's good." "Good," Elias repeated, and the word came out with an edge she hadn't heard from him before, something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but had the temperature of both. "It means the complaint landed," she said. "It means Cross filed it in time before Mercer could position himself. He's reacting now, not planning. That's the position we want him in." Elias set the message on the desk. He put his hands flat on either side of it. He was looking at it the way she had seen him look at the forged signature, that particular stillness of a man, reckoning with the full size of a thing he had been kept from seeing. "What terms do you think he'll offer?" he said. "Return of a portion of the funds," she said. "He won't offer all of it, he can't. It's spent. He'll offer what he has plus the withdrawal of the Holloway claim in exchange for the complaint being dropped." She paused. "He'll frame it as practical. Quicker, cleaner, no court proceedings. And if we accept," she looked at him steadily, "he walks away. He finds another estate, another employer who doesn't know his history, and he does it again." She let that sit. The tenants on this land spent years under a man who stole from them by proxy. Ruth's family had a leaking roof for 2 winters because Mercer said the funds weren't available. If we settle quietly, none of that is on record. It disappears. Elias lifted his eyes from the desk and looked at her. "Don't settle," she said. "Not unless Cross tells us we can't win, and I don't think Cross is going to tell us that." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Write back to Cross. Tell him to come here. I don't want to discuss this by messenger." "I already drafted the response," she said. She held it out. He looked at the folded paper in her hand. He took it. He read it. It was 6 lines clear and direct, asking Cross to come Thursday at the earliest convenience and outlining what they knew of Mercer's position. He looked up. "You wrote this before you brought me the message." "I wrote it while I was walking from the estate office to the study," she said. It took about 40 seconds. Something crossed his face, that almost expression she was still learning to read. 40 seconds, he said. The response seemed obvious, she said. He folded the letter and gave it to the messenger himself. Cross came Thursday. He sat across from them both in the study, them both side by side now at the desk, Clara with her ledgers and Cross with his court documents, and Elias between them, like a man who had recently discovered he was no longer standing alone, and was not entirely certain how to carry that, and he laid out what Mercer's attorney had offered. It was exactly what Clara had predicted. 60% restitution, withdrawal of the Holloway claim. Mercer to leave New England entirely. "It's not nothing," Cross said. 60% of $8,000 is nearly $5,000. That would go a significant distance toward the tenant repairs and the account deficits. "What are our odds in court?" Elias said. Cross looked at Clara briefly, then back at Elias. "With the documentation Mrs. Harrington has assembled and Dora's testimony about the letter and the notary on Miller Road, who it turns out is willing to cooperate in exchange for leniency on his own expired licensure issues, I would say our odds are very good, not certain. Courts are never certain, but very good." "Then we don't settle," Elias said. Cross nodded. He had, Clara thought, been expecting that answer. "There's a complication," Cross said. He reached into his satchel and produced another document. "Mercer's attorney filed a counter-motion this morning. He's arguing that the accounts were managed according to verbal instructions from Mr. Harrington himself, that the irregularities were authorized." The room went very still. "He's saying I told him to do it," Elias said. "He's saying you authorized discretionary payments without documentation," Cross said carefully, "which is technically distinct from—" "He's calling me a liar," Elias said. "He's building a defense," Cross said. "It's what attorneys do. The question is whether we can demonstrate conclusively that you had no knowledge of and gave no authorization for any of the Holloway payments or the vendor inflation." Clara was already opening her journal. "June through September of 1814, she said. "Elias was in Boston. I need every piece of correspondence from that period letters received any record of his presence in the city." She looked at Elias. "Who did you see in Boston? Who can place you there?" he thought. "My uncle Charles Harrington. He lives on Beacon Hill. I stayed with him for 6 weeks. After that I took rooms on State Street. The landlord is a man named Fitch, he'll remember." He paused. "I had meetings with a shipping merchant, a man named Greer, about a contract for the Northfields grain export. He'll have records." "Write all of it down," Clara said, sliding her journal across to him. "Every name, every date you can recall. Cross needs it to build the alibi." Elias took the journal. His eyes moved down the page to where her handwriting ended and the blank space began. And she saw him pause for just a moment, reading the last line she had written, which was from the night after Cross's first visit. She had forgotten what the last line said. She remembered now. "He looked at me today like I am a person he is genuinely glad exists in the world. I don't know what to do with that." Elias looked at the page for 1 beat longer than necessary. He did not look up at her. He picked up the pen and began to write. Clara looked at the window. Her face was perfectly composed. Her ears were warm. Cross left with 12 pages of notes and a timeline that he said was cleaner than most he'd seen in 30 years of practice. After he was gone, Elias stood at the study window for a while. Clara was at the desk reorganizing the correspondence file, and the room had the particular quality it had developed over the past 2 weeks. A working quiet, the quiet of two people who had found a rhythm together and no longer needed to fill the silence to make it comfortable. "My uncle," Elias said without turning. "Charles Harrington. He'll receive a letter from Cross within the week." "Good?" Clara said. "He knew my wife," Elias said. "Catherine. He was fond of her." A pause. "He'll want to know about you?" Clara looked up. "He'll ask me what you're like," Elias said. He still hadn't turned. "He asks about everyone. He's the kind of man who collects people, keeps track of them. He wrote to me every week when I was in Boston." His voice was level, but there was something underneath it, that careful quality of a man saying more than the words themselves carry. He was one of the few people who didn't stop writing after Catherine died. Most people... He stopped. Clara waited. "Most people didn't know what to say," he said. "So they said nothing. Charles kept writing, same as always. Sent me news about the street, what the weather was doing, whether the harbor had frozen." He turned from the window then finally and looked at her. "Ordinary things. He understood that what I needed wasn't he understood." Clara held his gaze. "He sounds like someone worth knowing." "He is." Elias paused. "I think he'll like you." It was the second time he had said something like that. "She'd like you. He'll like you," as if he was building a world in which she existed inside it, naturally, in which the people who mattered to him would come to know her, and find as he was finding that she was someone worth knowing. She did not know if he was aware of doing it. She did not ask. "What will you tell him?" she said. "When he asks what I'm like." Elias looked at her for a long moment, considering. The clock ticked. Outside, the afternoon was going long and gold. "The truth," he said finally. "Which is..." He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her with that open expression, the one that cost him something, the one she had been cataloging since the morning she brought him the ledgers, and then he said quietly, "That you are the most capable person I've encountered in a very long time, and that I have spent the better part of 2 months not knowing what to do about that." The room was very still. Clara looked at him. "2 months?" she said. "We've been married 6 weeks." "I know," he said. "I started not knowing what to do about it fairly early." She looked at the desk, at the correspondence file, at her own hands. "Elias," she said. He was quiet. "The letters," she said. "The personal letters I found in the older ledgers. I didn't read them all. I want you to know that. I put them back." A long pause. "I know," he said. She looked up. "You know, I noticed they'd been moved," he said. "Slightly, not by much. And then I noticed they'd been put back." He held her gaze. "I knew it was you. I wasn't angry. I was..." He stopped. Tried again. "They were Catherine's letters. She wrote them during the last year. She knew she was ill before she told me. She wrote till she was writing through it, putting it somewhere so it didn't stay only inside her." He looked at the window again. "I kept them. I don't know why I keep them in the estate office. I think I put them there when I couldn't have them near me anymore, but I couldn't make myself get rid of them." Clara said nothing. "What you said the morning you brought me the ledgers," he said. "You said you weren't sure I wanted to know. About Mercer. About the estate." His voice was very quiet. "You were right that I didn't want to know. I haven't wanted to know anything about this house, this land, any of it for 3 years. Because caring about it meant being here. And being here..." He stopped. "Meant being without her," Clara said. "Yes," he said. The word fell into the room like a stone into still water. She let it settle. Then she said, "She sounds like she was extraordinary." He looked at her. "She was," he said. "She was, yes, she was." "I'm not her," Clara said carefully. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not a replacement for anything. I know what this is. I know how it started." "I know that too," he said. His voice was different now, lower, more deliberate. "Clara, I know that." She held his gaze. But something has changed, she said. Because she was a practical woman, and practical women did not pretend they couldn't see what was in front of them. Yes, he said. Something has changed. The clock ticked. She nodded once slowly, processing it, filing it somewhere inside herself, where the important things went, the things that required careful handling, the things that were real and fragile and couldn't be rushed. All right, she said. All right, he repeated, as if he wasn't entirely sure what either of them had just agreed to, but was willing to stand in the agreement anyway. She went back to the correspondence file. He stayed at the window a while longer. They did not speak again for an hour, but the silence between them was a different kind now. Not the silence of two people being careful, but the silence of two people who have said something true and are sitting with the weight of it, neither of them trying to make it smaller than it is. The second letter from Mercer's attorney arrived Friday evening. It was not another offer. It was a threat. Clara read it at the dinner table because Dora had brought it in while the food was being served, and Elias had opened it before she could suggest he wait. She watched his face while he read it. She watched the control come down like a shutter swift and total, and she knew before he passed it across the table that whatever it said had changed the shape of things. She read it. Mercer's attorney was no longer requesting a meeting. He was stating in the formal language of legal correspondence that his client was prepared to testify in open court under oath that Elias Harrington had been aware of the account irregularities for at minimum 2 years, had sanctioned them in exchange for a personal financial arrangement, and that Mrs. Harrington's involvement in the account investigation was itself evidence of an attempt to conceal the husband's prior knowledge by manufacturing a discovery narrative. He was saying that Clara was part of the cover-up. He was saying that she had not found the fraud. He was saying she had been placed here to bury it. She set the letter down. She looked at Elias. He was looking at his plate. His jaw was tight and his hands were flat on the table, and she could see the effort it was costing him to hold still. He's desperate, she said. He's lying, Elias said. Both things are true, she said. He's desperate and he's lying and he's willing to put my name in a courtroom to save himself. She kept her voice level. This changes the calculus. If he testifies, and anyone believes even a portion of it, no one will believe it, Elias said. They might, she said. I arrived 6 weeks ago. I have no history here. I went into that estate office without explicit permission. I asked Dora to find a key. She met his eyes. On paper from a distance if you wanted to make it look a certain way. Clara. His voice was sharp. Not at her. At the situation. Stop building his case for him. I'm building my defense, she said. Which is what we need to do before Monday when Cross needs to know about this. Elias picked up the letter and read it again. She watched him read it. She watched the shutter come up further on his face. The old closed expression, and she felt something tighten in her chest. Not for herself, but for him, because she understood what was happening. He was retreating. The way he retreated. Pulling everything inward, going silent, because that was what he knew how to do when the world pressed too hard. Elias, she said. He looked up. Don't close, she said. He stared at her. I can see you doing it, she said. Closing up. Going inside. I understand why. But if you go silent on me now in the middle of this, we lose. Not in court necessarily, but here. She gestured slightly at the space between them. I need you present. Both things have to be true at the same time, the legal fight and the... She stopped. And the other thing. The thing we said this afternoon. I need both. He held her gaze for a long, unguarded moment, and then something in his face shifted. Not the shutter coming down, but the opposite of that. The shutters being pushed back deliberately, the kind of choice that costs something and is made anyway. All right, he said, low and deliberate. All right, she said. She reached across the table and picked up his water glass empty and filled it from the pitcher and set it in front of him. He looked at it, then he picked it up and drank. And Clara thought we are learning each other in reverse. From practical to personal. From ledgers to letters to this dinner table, this letter, this moment of choosing not to disappear. It was not a love story the way love stories were told in drawing rooms. It was slower, less decorated, built on evidence rather than feeling. But it was real. And real, Clara had learned, was the only kind worth having. "We write to Cross tonight," she said. "We tell him about the letter. We tell him everything." "Yes," Elias said. "And tomorrow," she said, "I want to go back through the 1812 accounts. If Mercer is claiming Elias sanctioned the arrangement 2 years ago, I want everything from before 1814 to be airtight. If there's any period where the oversight was genuinely loose, I need to know before he does." "My oversight was loose," Elias said quietly. "For 3 years. That's the truth. I wasn't watching. I wasn't here, not really. And Mercer knew it and used it." He set down the water glass. "That's not a crime. But it's the opening he's using." "Then we close it," she said. "With documentation, with testimony, with everything we have." She looked at him directly. "You were grieving. That's not nothing. That's not weakness. It's human. And it doesn't make you responsible for what he chose to do with your grief." He looked at her for a long time. "Thank you," he said, for the 3rd time. But it came out differently than the first 2, fuller, heavier, like the word had grown in the space between the first time he said it and now. "Write to Cross," she said. "I'll start on the 1812 ledgers." "It's 7 o'clock in the evening," he said. "I'm aware," she said. He almost smiled. She was close enough now to see the almost smile coming, before it arrived, the slight change in the lines around his mouth, the infinitesimal softening. "I'll write the letter," he said. "And then I'm coming to the estate office." She raised an eyebrow. "2 pairs of eyes," he said simply. "If you're going back to 1812, I know things about that period you don't. Things I saw and didn't understand at the time." He stood and picked up the letter. "Give me 20 minutes." She stood. She left for the estate office. She lit the lamp and opened the oldest ledger and began. 20 minutes later, she heard his footsteps in the hall. He came in. He pulled the chair to her side of the desk, not across from her, beside her, and sat down and looked at the open page. "Show me where you're starting," he said. She showed him. And they worked. Side by side in the lamplight, in the old stone house that had been silent for 3 years, and was learning slowly, imperfectly, and with a great deal of effort, how to hold the sound of 2 people alive inside it again. Outside, the summer night settled over Harrington County. The fields were dark. The new roof on Ruth's cottage held firm. Somewhere in Springfield, a desperate man was waiting to hear if his gamble had paid off. It had not. It would not. But Clara Whitmore did not know yet the full extent of what the morning would bring. She would know by dawn. They worked until past midnight. The 1812 ledgers were older, the handwriting different. Mercer's predecessor, a man named Howell, who had retired and moved south before Clara ever arrived. Howell's records were meticulous, almost obsessively so, and the contrast with what came after was stark enough that Clara felt it like a physical thing. The exact page, the exact quarter where Mercer's hand had taken over, and the careful order had begun almost imperceptibly to bend. "Here," she said, pointing to an entry in the 3rd quarter of 1813. "This is where it starts. Not the stealing, the pattern. He spent 6 months learning the accounts before he touched anything. He needed to understand how Howell recorded things, so he could mimic the structure while altering the numbers." Elias leaned forward. He had been beside her for 3 hours, and he had said more useful things in those 3 hours than she would have predicted, details she didn't have, context she couldn't have found in any ledger. The name of a tenant who had complained directly to him in 1813 and been told by Mercer the matter was resolved. A supply contract he vaguely remembered signing that did not appear anywhere in the current records. A payment he had authorized personally that showed up in the books at twice the amount he recalled approving. "He was watching you too," Clara said, "learning how closely you reviewed things, learning what you signed without questioning." "Not closely enough," Elias said. "You were grieving," she said, for the second time. She said it without softening it, without apology, because it was true, and because he needed to hear it as fact rather than excuse. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I need to stop using that as an explanation." "It's not an explanation," she said. "It's a context. There's a difference." She looked at him. "An explanation says the behavior was acceptable. A context says it was human. You don't have to perform guilt for 3 years of grief, Elias. You just have to fix what's fixable now." He held her gaze across the lamplight. His face was tired, genuinely tired, the kind that went deeper than one late night, and in the tiredness, he looked more real to her than he had in any formal moment of the past 6 weeks. "When did you get this wise?" he said. "I've always been this wise," she said. "You just didn't know it yet." He almost smiled. She caught the full shape of it this time, not the almost, but the actual brief quiet, not the kind of smile that performs itself for an audience, but the kind that happens before a man can decide whether to let it. She looked back at the ledger. She did not let herself make anything of it. Not yet. Keg. The messenger came at 6 in the morning. Clara had slept 4 hours. She heard the horse in the yard from her room and was dressed and downstairs before Dora had finished answering the door. The message was from Cross, and it was not sent by post. Cross had sent his own assistant, a young man named Peters, who looked like he had ridden through the night, and confirmed it when she asked him directly. "Mr. Cross said to come straight through," Peters said. Didn't stop. Clara read the note. Then she read it again. Then she went to Elias's study and knocked, and went in without waiting. He was already awake, already dressed, standing at the window, with a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold. He turned when she came in. She held out the note. He read it. The color didn't drain from his face. He was too controlled for that, but something settled in his jaw that she recognized now as the way he absorbed bad news. "Mercer has a witness," he said. "A bought one," she said. "Cross is certain of it. A man named Pratt, currently in Springfield, who is claiming he was present at a conversation between Elias and Mercer in the spring of 1814, where Elias verbally authorized the Holloway payments. That conversation never happened." "I know," she said. "But Pratt is prepared to swear it did. And if he takes the stand before we can discredit him—" "Who is he?" Elias said. "Pratt. Do you know that name?" Clara was already thinking. She pulled her journal from her pocket. She had started carrying it on her person 2 weeks ago, and flipped back through her notes. "Pratt," she said. "Pratt." She stopped on a page. "There's a W. Pratt listed in the 1814 supply ledger. 1 payment August. Listed as a labor contractor." Elias stared at her. "Let me see." She showed him. He looked at the entry. He looked at it for a long time. "I don't know this man," he said. "But Mercer paid him," she said. "In August of 1814, which is 2 months after the date on the forged signature," Elias said, "and 2 months after I was in Boston." They looked at each other. "He paid Pratt in August," Clara said slowly, working it through. "Which means Pratt wasn't a witness to a real conversation. He was a payment, a receipt." She looked at the ledger. Mercer put him in the accounts to create a paper trail, not to record a real labor contract, but to establish that money changed hands between them at the right time. If Pratt testifies, Cross can show the payment, but Mercer will say that payment was legitimate labor, and Pratt will confirm it, and we're back where we started. "Unless," Elias said. She looked up. "Unless we find out what Pratt actually did for Mercer," he said. "Not what the ledger says. What actually happened. If there was no labor performed, if there's no record of any work done on this estate in August of 1814 by a man named Pratt, then the payment is fabricated, and Pratt is provably in Mercer's pocket." Clara was already writing. "I need to talk to every farmhand who was here in 1814, she said, "and the suppliers, and the neighboring properties." She looked at him. "Can you get me names? Everyone who worked this land in 1814. "Daniel," he said immediately. Ruth's husband. He's been here longer than anyone. He'll know who was here and who wasn't. Send for him now, she said. Before breakfast. I'm sorry, I know it's early. Clara. He said her name the way he had been saying it for 2 weeks, without ceremony, without the careful distance of those first 31 days, with the particular ease of a word that has stopped feeling like a formality and started feeling like a habit. Stop apologizing. Send for him yourself if it's faster. She was already at the door, Daniel came within 20 minutes. He was a large, quiet man with the careful manner of someone who had learned to measure his words in a house where words had consequences. He sat across from Clara and Elias in the study, and he listened to the question, and then he thought about it with the genuine seriousness of a man who understood that thinking carefully was more useful than answering quickly. Pratt, he said finally. W. Pratt. I don't know a Pratt from this county. He paused. But I know a Pratt from over the Andover line, Walter Pratt. He does odd jobs mostly. Hauling sometimes. He worked for the Glenmore estate 2 years back. Was he ever on this property? Clara said. In 1814. Summer or autumn, Daniel thought. Not that I saw, and I'd have seen. Mr. Mercer had me keeping track of who was coming and going that summer because of the Northfield fencing project. He looked at Clara. I wrote it down. I keep a record my wife taught me to write, and I've kept notes since 1809. I've got every name of every person who came onto this property for work that summer. Clara looked at Elias. He was already leaning forward. I need that record, Daniel, she said. Yes, ma'am, he said. I'll have it here within the hour. He was back in 40 minutes. His record was a small notebook, worn at the spine, written in a careful, unpracticed hand that had gotten steadier and more confident as the pages progressed. He opened it to July and August of 1814 and laid it on the desk. Walter Pratt's name did not appear. Not in July, not in August, not in September. Clara traced her finger down the list of names. 14 men had done work on the estate that summer, all documented, all with the nature of their work noted beside their names. No Pratt. No one matching the description. No gap in the record that might have allowed for an unlogged worker. He was never here, she said. No, ma'am, Daniel said. She looked at Elias. He was looking at the notebook with an expression she had come to recognize, the particular focus of a man who is seeing the precise moment when a fight turns. Cross, he said. I'll write the letter now, she said. Daniel, she looked up. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, even if the answer is uncomfortable. Daniel met her eyes. Yes, ma'am. Mercer, she said. The tenants knew something was wrong. Ruth told me. Did anyone ever consider coming directly to Mr. Harrington before now? A silence. Daniel's hands were still on his hat, turning it once. We talked about it, he said, more than once. He glanced at Elias briefly, then back to Clara. But Mr. Harrington, after Mrs. Catherine passed, we didn't want to bring more trouble to the house. And Mercer, he had a way of making you feel like there was no point, like things would only get worse if you made noise. He stopped. I'm sorry, sir. That's the truth of it. Elias said very quietly, I know. That's on me, Daniel. Not you. Daniel nodded, once short and accepting. The nod of a man who has been waiting 3 years to hear those 5 words, and is not going to make a performance of receiving them. Is there anything else I can do? Daniel asked. Yes, Clara said. Would you be willing to give a sworn statement about the work records, about who was and wasn't on this property in 1814? Yes, ma'am, he said without hesitation. After he left, Elias stood and went to the window. She let him stand there. She wrote to Cross the second letter in 12 hours, clear and fast, and carrying the weight of everything they had just found. Daniel's notebook. Pratt's absence. The payment in the ledger against the empty record. She sealed it and sent Peters back to Hartford before 8 o'clock. Then she sat in the chair and let herself feel for approximately 90 seconds how tired she was. Clara, Elias said. She looked up. He was still at the window, but he had turned halfway toward her. When this is over, He said, "I owe you more than I know how to repay." "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I live here. This is my home too. Defending it isn't a favor." He turned fully. "That's the first time you've called it that." She thought about it. He was right. In 6 weeks, she had called it the estate, the house, the property, Harrington Manor. She had never called it home. "Well," she said, "it is." He looked at her, and this time, he did not look away first. Cross arrived the following Tuesday with 3 things: a court date, a deposition from the unlicensed notary on Miller Road, who had confirmed making the forged document on Mercer's commission, and the information that Walter Pratt had upon being contacted by Cross's associate, and informed that his name appeared in the ledger as a paid witness immediately and completely changed his story. "He folded in under an hour," Cross said, not without satisfaction. Once he understood he was looking at perjury charges, his memory improved considerably. He confirmed Mercer paid him to claim he'd witnessed a conversation that never took place. Cross set the papers on the desk. "Mercer's attorney withdrew the counter-motion this morning. They're no longer claiming authorization." "They're backing down," Elias said. "They're retreating to their last position," Cross said, "which is straight theft, no frame around it, and a defendant with no credible witnesses and a forged document on record." He looked at both of them. "They'll plead before this goes to trial. They don't want a jury to see what Mrs. Harrington assembled." Clara said, "What does a plea mean for restitution?" "Full restitution as a condition," Cross said. "We hold that line. The court will enforce it." He paused. "It also means Mercer's name is on the record, permanently. He won't find another position of trust in this state." The room went quiet for a moment, not the quiet of uncertainty, but the quiet of completion, the kind that comes when a thing that has been fought for is finally solidly won. Elias looked at Clara. She looked back. "Good," she said. It was, she thought, a profoundly inadequate word for what she felt. But she was a practical woman, and practical women did not burst into tears in front of their attorneys, however deserved it might have been. Cross left after another hour of procedural detail, and then they were alone in the study. The two of them, the familiar desk, the familiar quiet. And outside the window, the summer was doing what it had been doing all season, burning slow and gold, and the fields looked better than they had in the first week she'd arrived, better, in fact, than she suspected they'd looked in 3 years. "It's over," Elias said. "The Mercer part is over," she said. "The accounts still need another month of work. The northeast parcel needs surveying now that the Holloway claim is withdrawn. The tenant contracts need renegotiating with the corrected rental figures." "I know," he said. "I meant," he stopped, looked at her. "I meant something else." She waited. He came around the desk. He did not rush it. He moved the way he did most things, deliberately, without performance, with the particular quality of a man who has decided something and is following through regardless of the cost. He stopped in front of her, closer than he had ever stood without a desk between them. "I built a wall," he said. "After Catherine. I built it, and I maintained it, and for 3 years it worked exactly as intended." He looked at her directly. "And then you arrived and knocked on my study door with a breakfast tray and told me my estate manager was a thief, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, I looked up, and the wall was gone, and I have no idea when it happened." Clara held very still. "You didn't tear it down," he said. "You didn't even push on it. You just went around it. You went to work and you kept going, and one morning I woke up and I was watching you from the window, walking the fence lines at 6 in the morning, and I realized I had been watching for you. Not just seeing you, watching for you." She said nothing. She was afraid if she said something too quickly, it would break the shape of what he was trying to give her. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I know how to manage a study and sign documents and conduct myself correctly in a courtroom. I don't know how to—" He paused. "I've forgotten how to let someone matter." "You haven't forgotten," she said quietly. "You've been doing it for 6 weeks. You just haven't been calling it that." He looked at her. "Is that what this is?" "That's what this is," she said. He reached out and took her hand, not dramatically, not the way it happened in the stories women told each other about love. There was no sweeping gesture, no declaration that rattled the walls. He just reached out and took her hand and held it, and she felt the warmth of his palm against hers, and the slight roughness of a man who actually worked his own land when he worked it, and she thought this. This is what a real thing feels like. Not decorated, not performed, just true. "I'm not easy to live with," he said. "I noticed," she said. "I go quiet when I should speak. I work at night. I forget to eat unless someone reminds me." He looked down at her hand in his. "I have a sister who is going to appear on this doorstep within the month, whether invited or not. And when she meets you, she is going to immediately claim you as an ally, and I will spend the rest of my life outnumbered." Clara felt something unlock in her chest. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a loosening. Like a knot that has been tight for so long it had started to feel like it was supposed to be there, and now it was releasing, and underneath it was just room. "I write in my journal every night," she said. "I will always tell you the truth even when it's uncomfortable. I am better at managing systems than I am at managing feelings, and I am working on the second one." She looked at him. "I also already know I like your sister, based entirely on her letters." He looked up. "She wrote to you." 4 pages, Clara said. 2 weeks ago, I wrote back." Something crossed his face. Surprise, and then something warmer than surprise. And then the full quiet shape of a man realizing that the people he loves have already started to make room for each other without being asked. "Of course she did," he said, and for the first time she heard something that was not almost a smile, but entirely one warm and unguarded, and directed at her without any of the distance that had defined the first 31 days. She squeezed his hand once, brief and certain. He squeezed back. Margaret arrived 17 days later. She came without warning, as promised, in a hired coach with 2 bags and a hat that had seen better decades, and an expression that said she had been looking forward to this for considerably longer than 17 days. Clara met her at the front door. Margaret Harrington was tall, brown-haired, quick-eyed, and she looked at Clara for approximately 3 seconds before she said, "You're exactly what I hoped you'd be," and came inside like she owned the place, which Clara reflected she essentially had for 3 years, while her brother was absent from it. "Elias said you'd appear within the month," Clara said, taking her coat. "Elias knows me well," Margaret said. She looked around the entrance hall. At the portraits, the polished floor, the open door of the study where Clara knew her brother was pretending to work instead of listening for the sound of the carriage. "It looks different," Margaret said. "The flowers," Clara said. "I put flowers in the hall, and I had the north windows unshuttered." Margaret looked at her. "He told me about the ledgers," she said. "And Mercer. And the attorney." She paused. "He told me about the 31 nights." Clara held her gaze. "He shouldn't have felt guilty for that." "No," Margaret said. "He should have known better than to let Mercer steer him into it in the first place. Mercer suggested the separate arrangement. Elias was barely present enough to agree." She said it without softening it, with the candid exactness of a woman who loved her brother without excusing him. "How is he?" "Better," Clara said. "Every week better." Margaret studied her. "And you?" Clara thought about it honestly, the way she did most things. She thought about 31 nights alone at a 30-seat table, and the morning she had picked up the breakfast tray and carried it down the hall and knocked on a door, like a woman who had decided she was done being invisible. She thought about ledgers and lamplight and a hand reaching across a table to fill a glass. She thought about a man who had forgotten how to let someone matter, and the long, imperfect daily work of remembering. "I'm home," she said. Margaret smiled. It was Elias's smile. She realized the real one, not the almost the whole thing, just worn more easily, more often with less cost. "Good," Margaret said. And then Elias appeared in the hallway, and Margaret crossed to him and they embrace the way people embrace when they have been worrying about each other for a long time and are relieved to see the worry becoming unnecessary, and Clara stood a few steps back and watched the shape of a family that was healing. The way real things heal, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and silences, and the daily choice to keep trying. Elias looked at her over his sister's shoulder. She looked back. He held out his hand. She crossed the hall and took it. So, the court proceeding was brief. Mercer entered a plea in the second week of September. Full restitution ordered by the court and to be paid in installments over 4 years against the estate accounts. His name entered into the county record as convicted of fraud and theft. His attorney's fees she suspected would consume whatever he had left. Clara sat beside Elias in the Hartford courtroom, and she listened to the proceeding with her hands folded in her lap and her face composed and her journal in her satchel, where she would write about it later in the plain, clear language she used for things that mattered. When it was done, they walked out into the September air. Cross shook their hands. He held Clara's a beat longer than Elias's and said quietly, "In 30 years, Mrs. Harrington, I have not seen documentation assembled with that precision by anyone in this county, attorney or otherwise." "Thank you," she said. "I mean it as an observation, not a compliment," he said. "Compliments are for performances. That was skill." She nodded. That was, she thought, the correct distinction. On the ride home, she and Elias sat side by side in the carriage, and the September afternoon went past the windows in the long, amber-lit way of a season beginning to close, and neither of them spoke for a while. Then Elias said, "Margaret wants to stay through October." "I know," Clara said. "She asked me yesterday." "You don't mind?" "I suggested she stay through November," Clara said. He turned his head and looked at her. She looked back. "She's teaching 2 of the tenant children to read," Clara said. "Ruth's youngest and the Caldwell boy. She started on Thursday. She's not going to want to leave in the middle of it." Elias was quiet for a moment. Then, "You asked her to do that." "I mentioned there might be interest," Clara said. She decided the rest. He shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, in the manner of a man who keeps discovering that the person beside him is larger than he had measured. "Clara," he said. "I'm glad my father made that arrangement," he said. "Whatever his reasons were, whatever your father's reasons were." He paused. "I'm glad it was you." She looked at him. At the face, she had spent 6 weeks learning the real face, not the shuttered one, the one that cost him something to show, and that he was showing more freely now, not all the way, not without effort, but more. She thought about practical women and what they were and weren't supposed to want, and about the 11 minutes in which her father had explained her future without asking her opinion. She thought about everything she had built inside this house, not with love as a starting point, but with honesty, with work, with the patient refusal to be made small, and how that foundation had turned out to hold more weight than she had expected. She reached over and took his hand. "So am I," she said. The entry in her journal that night was longer than usual. She wrote about the courtroom and cross, and the clean, settling feeling of justice actually landing where it was supposed to. She wrote about Margaret teaching letters to Ruth's youngest daughter on the kitchen step, both of them bent over a piece of chalk and a worn slate completely absorbed. She wrote about the northeast parcel, now properly surveyed correctly, recorded its boundary stones reset, and its acreage accounted for, without ambiguity or fraud. She wrote about Elias, who had stayed beside her through every part of this, and who was learning daily imperfectly, with occasional retreats and a stubbornness that she had stopped trying to argue around, and started simply waiting out how to be present in his own life again. She wrote, "This is not the marriage I was promised in 11 minutes in my father's study. It is harder than that, and slower and more demanding and more real." She paused. Then she wrote, "I would not trade it." She closed the journal. She put her hand flat on the cover. Outside, the September night was settling over Harrington Manor, cool and clear, the kind of night that smelled like the end of summer and the beginning of something else. The fields were in better shape than they had been in 3 years. The tenants' roofs were mended. The accounts were honest. The house was warm, and Clara Whitmore, who had arrived at a front gate with one trunk, 2 hat boxes, and a journal, and who had refused from the first night at the 30-seat table to be made invisible, sat in her room in the home she had built out of evidence and truth and the daily stubborn choice to stay, and she was exactly precisely completely where she intended to be. She had come to this house as a practical arrangement. She had built something the arrangement had never promised her, and she had done it the only way. Real things are ever built, not with luck or circumstance or the mercy of an easy situation, but with her own hands, her own mind, and the absolute refusal to let a wall, however old and however high, be the last word. That was not a small thing. It was in fact everything.